Hi, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of LimitlessEdX. We are going to be discussing grades are BS, rethinking assessment in modern education. You are joined by myself, Jeanette Easton, and
Andrea Harris.
thank you for listening in today. And let's get started. So, Andrea, what do you think about assessments?
You know what? It's actually an awesome topic. I'm really excited to chat with you about this today because more so, we are starting to see a shift in parents and families realizing that grades are really just very, very subjective. Assessments tend to be subjective. And when we say assessments, it just means like the testing that they do in schools, grades that are on report cards. You hear more and more stories about how children are just being given passing grades or, the basic level to be able to move on to the next grade when really they're not learning that information that they need, or more so that it's just to move kids along, right? So it's interesting to see different opinions shifting on what grades mean and what assessment means and what that looks like. I think in terms of very early years, it's often laughable that we could even grade 4 and 5 year olds in the kindergarten level. And like honestly, it just gets more ridiculous as you get up there. I know lots of people have different stories about all different years that their children may have been in where grades were subjective to the teacher. Grades might have been made up. I could share lots of stories about that if teachers didn't finish curriculum. And in terms of just being professional, we know that teachers do have to put something down on report cards. So we're really going to have a discussion today about what that means, what that looks like, and is that applicable in our lives today or moving forward as our kids start to graduate and look for jobs or just even basic functioning in real life.
Oh, definitely. And educators really need to change their mindset around this as well. Not to say there isn't some validity in, certain assessments on a basic level, but as we move forward, it's really going to be, you need to show that you understand. And what does that look like when you show your understanding? Because these report cards are copy and paste statements, most of which parents don't even understand. And is that a clear representation of what your child knows?
Definitely. Oh my goodness. I could go on and on about this because there are so many teachers that really have issues with the wording that we are forced to use or used to when I was in the profession that we were mandated to use in report card writing and things like with a high degree of effectiveness. What does that really mean? And really, would parents of non if they're immigrants and they don't speak English, are they really going to understand those things? And what do grades really mean? And then as you get to grade 7 and 8 and you're moving towards like percentages on the report card, it can get really different. And I recognize that, like you said, assessments and testing are valid in certain instances. So, for example, obviously, math concepts are really, really important to make sure the child has that understanding before you move on to build onto their understanding and the concepts they know, but can they apply it in real life? That's what we really want to know. So, oftentimes, I think parents who are homeschooling or in the alternative education realm, that's one of the things that they first let go. You don't often see homeschooling parents testing their kids once or twice a week, or, um, you know, it's interesting to see the shift, definitely. And in terms of what testing really means, are we really gearing kids up, young kids, to be able to memorize facts that they won't actually remember a week later? So I think it's more important to do like the hands-on learning and um, just the assessment of understanding and how they can apply it in real life, as opposed to like the outdated pencil paper method of what we grew up and we were used to.
Oh, for sure. And the funny thing is, even high school, I was I got 50% in everything. I was more concerned about being social than anything else. But then I applied as a mature student to college, and they skipped me three levels ahead, which is when I started realizing that maybe I was just a fish that they were trying to get to climb a tree, and it wasn't working out, right? And it ties to I think there's so many people that are similar, a lot of young people that are maybe those C students, but they really did excel, but just not in the way that um, was considered valuable within the system and wasn't assessed properly. So you didn't assess whether they could achieve or, were high achievers. They just had a pigeonhole and you had to fit into that small pigeonhole.
Definitely. It like definitely places kids in this box, right? And one of the things I am a huge believer in is really instilling great confidence in children and celebrating them for the gifts that they have. And I have seen time and time again throughout my career, a child's self-worth really starts to develop when they get to school and they start to look around and then they realize that their achievement is based on comparing what they are doing to their peers. And it's very apparent from very early on, from the second you walk into school, there's comparison everywhere. Someone can do this, but you can't, or someone is doing this type of subject and you're not, or you're not reading yet, or you don't know the numbers yet. And it's very focused on all the different things that you have to still do without celebrating all the gifts that we have. And I think their individuality and their creativity is often overlooked. And that's when it gets stifled too, right? The creativity is often squashed in terms of memorizing facts and really excelling in the things that you're being tested on, which is a huge thing, is like teaching to the test as well. Is that really a good reflection of how and what you want kids to learn? I know it's a huge thing in the States, especially with the standardized testing, but I mean, we have that here in Ontario as well with EQAO. And I can tell you, it's not a reflection of what the kids are able to do, especially in lower income areas where they are not, they often also think it's BS, right? So you can have very brilliant children who just refuse to do stuff like that because they don't want to.
Oh, for sure. It stifles their curiosity. Instead of making the child at the center, exploring things that they are naturally curious about. It's so transactional. Like I have to do this to get this grade, but is it authentic learning? Am I exploring things that I am interested in? What value is coming from this in the long run? How does it apply in the real world? And it just doesn't. We really need to throw things out, so to speak. And grades almost become like a drug. When I taught at the college level, it was very interesting because I had a lot of these students. I would give them an initial grade and I would say, well, like, come and talk to me. Let's have some dialogue and figure out what next steps are. And they were very much like, I need an A. I want an A. It was almost like a drug addiction. It was actually, I found it very curious to see how fixated they became on it. And I was like, look, it's just a letter. I will give you an A. You tell me what you learned from your journey. Tell me what your next steps are going to be. Tell me, like, give me value. What kind of value are you getting from this? How are you going to grow from this? How do we make this more authentic? Because a letter is just a letter, and you don't bring in your report card to your, when you go in for a job interview.
Definitely. Like, I know we place so much importance on it as a society, as a teacher, like as a whole school system, as a school board. Everyone's like always focused so much on the grades and report cards and how people are doing, when in reality, I have never been asked to show my report card from high school when I was applying for jobs, or your your grades in university or college. Like it's laughable when we think about it, but in terms of like the importance that we place on it for um, young children all the way up to teens, it becomes absolutely ridiculous, and we're really harming them. And I think it's not reflective of where we want our kids to be in the future. So in terms of discussing alternative ways of grading, I think it's a great conversation to be having today because we can kind of rethink how we are doing stuff. And yeah, I think the self-worth component is really just such a huge thing. We don't want to be comparing to each other. And like you said, it's like that dopamine hit, right? And I will also say too, a lot of times parents think it's only children who are receiving non-passing grades. So they're failing or they're receiving D's on report cards or like we do with the system where they are getting R's, which means they're remedial in Ontario. A lot of the times we think those are the children that are most affected with their self-esteem because they're comparing themselves, they're seeing that they're not as good, quote, as their peers. But in reality, it's a lot of very high achieving students as well. I think it's students from all different areas, but children who are used to receiving all A's on their report card get used to that. And then they base their self-worth and their value on their ability to get A's. So when they do encounter challenging subjects in the future, it can be even more detrimental to their self-esteem as well.
That's a really good point because even when I was, like on the college level, there were some students, you observe them in placements, you grade their papers, that kind of thing. And I found that those that were really strong writers did not perform as well in person, and those that didn't write so well performed very well. And I found that so interesting. And the ones that were high achievers, a lot of them had well, everyone has some degree of mental health, but there was quite a bit of mental health. And I think it was, based on, to your point, that it was really tied into that because then you give them a grade like their performance, they're not showing up. I'm like, well, you have to show up. But they were almost, it debilitated them so much so from moving forward and, just teaching them the skills to move past it, even when they're given something unfavorable. How do you do that? Because life is full of unfavorable feedback and failure and all these negative elements. How do you keep moving forward? And they need to
Definitely.
learn how to do that.
I think too, the fact that we tie kids' confidence into that really impedes their ability to flourish in their true gifts as well. It's ridiculous when we still see today how important even grandparents think your grades are, when in reality, like we have discussed before, the shift in the job market is changing to AI, and a lot of jobs will be lost to AI in the coming years. We've talked about the percentages before. It's very, very high, and the job market shifting. They are saying now, in terms of what you will be able to get, it's going to be a gig economy, and it's about showing your work and what you are doing, not achieving. So it's not like you're going to be able to still get into a lot of different professions when they don't exist anymore, or that the report cards, quote unquote, or your grades in university aren't necessarily going to be able to get you a job as an entrepreneur, being able to outsource and take on a bunch of side projects. It's really going to be about what you are achieving and how to showcase that. I think communication is going to be a huge piece moving forward, as it always has. So there are high importance placed on the ability to discuss things and understand what people say and be receptive to those things and discuss your learning. But in terms of being able to perform well or memorize on multiple choice tests, I think that is really outdated.
Oh, for sure. And even though there's going to be cutbacks, there's going to be a lot of new opportunities, and people need to try to, and some people are better than others at having foresight about what will come.
Mhm.
Pay attention to the signs. Like I'm really obsessed with education. So when it comes to education news, policy, all the boring stuff, a lot of people don't want to read, but because it's my industry, it gives me more foresight than the average, Joe or Josephine. So it's very helpful to pay attention to your industry. And one way to do that is to go to their networking events and being around people that are in the industry to learn what is to come and learning how to showcase your receipts in a way that makes sense and is relevant to you and your industry. So what I mean by that is, like, say, for example, you are an artist. Maybe you're in high school. Let's start from small. You can start with maybe a social media page or a portfolio website. And I think there's some, correct me if I'm wrong, Andrea, like a few for the younger ones too, some almost like scrapbooking type of journaling, something you can document.
There definitely is. There's so many different apps nowadays that you can look up. And honestly, there's a ton of different homeschool bloggers that you can follow that all use different forms. But I think most parents listening to this are going to be like, Andrea and Jeanette, how are we going to um, document learning then when we're homeschooling or when we're doing alternative education? Obviously, if you're sending your child to a learning pod, your expectation would be that they are documenting their learning in some way. I can tell you from a homeschool parent's perspective who just does learning at home on their own. One of the easiest ways is with your phone nowadays. Honestly, I'm all about ease and simplicity. So, and teachers did used to do this in the classroom as well. There's lots of different apps. We used to use like Seesaw. I mean, we get into some legalities about who has access to that data. So we didn't follow through, but there's always new ones coming in and out that teachers are trying. However, it comes down to basically just keeping track of what you're doing. So, in terms of journals, you can do from the moment kids start to pick up a pencil, and you can really learn a lot from what they're able to print and draw in August or September to the very end of the year. It's astounding. And I always recommend to this is just something I do for my personal records is always have your kids date their work, or if they're too young to do that, you can print the date at the top. So you can just have reference when you're going through any type of journal to see what they did on what day. A lot of times as well, when you're documenting with photographs, you can just take a picture of what activity you're doing that day and it's already date stamped. It's in your phone. Um, a lot of people prefer Google Drive. I do that myself, but whatever floats your boat in terms of electronic portfolios, you can just drop your photos in that. So then you have a folder for September and all the way through to the end of the school year. You can then further divide that into math. You could divide it into different subjects. You could do week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4, just really simple, easy ways of tracking your learning. And in terms of, we always like to call it CYA, you want to cover your behind in terms of if anyone ever asks, you have that to go back on for reference on to what your homeschool day looks like. And you can do that on trips. You can do that at the grocery store, take a picture of the things that you're buying. You can do mental math with that. Like we've talked about before, there are literally a million ideas on how to pick and choose what you are doing. And we can always help clients with that, with consulting or coaching. But in terms of what is going to be easiest for you, I always recommend both of those, like keeping track with a notebook and also doing an electronic portfolio.
Oh, definitely. And for anything, I have young children, so I use a portfolio and I just use like a plastic sleeve and shove their work there that we did because we do a lot of like crafts, or if I don't want to hold on to the crafts because who has space for that? Like Andrew said, you take the pictures, or a lot of homeschool families will have a social media page. It doesn't necessarily need to be public as well, or you could just have like a few family members if you wanted. But essentially, it just kind of helps you track some of the things that you do and showcase some of their skills, or yeah, a blog There are so many options, but definitely as you get older, um, starting senior high school, I would say, and post-secondary, start exploring like social media as a tool. They need to be given the skills to use it as a tool because social recruitment is very real. What does that mean? It means that people will hire you based on what they see, how you present yourself online. So, like Andrew was saying about, communication, it's the information age. You have to be able to communicate what you're doing, how you're doing it. And don't worry about being perfect. Nobody is, but just putting yourself out there and you just like a small child who starts, with a messy A, you're going to start seeing that you as a someone, your presence online will start to develop as well. And your first post will not be the same as your last post, and you'll start to see your own evolution. And people will be able to see that you are someone who's willing to grow, someone who's willing to experience life. And yeah, you're just going to start attracting those kind of people and doing it very conscientiously, right? So not
I think
just, you know, whatever diary they put on social media, but that thoughtfulness. Because if you go, say, on, for example, LinkedIn, you have to be, the idea is to be more professional. Some social media platforms maybe present differently depending on your medium. If you're in the, if you do music, you'll present differently than like a lawyer. So it really depends on, you have to move according to your industry and the gigs that you are looking for, and almost like an end goal.
I like that. I was almost laughing in my head because that's a good example of me after leaving teaching and my learning curve, right? For teachers who left the profession during the last few years and didn't have any plan on leaving the teaching profession and jumped right into business and didn't have the background knowledge for that. So it is a learning curve. And for kids, I think they pick it up much quicker and much more efficiently too. I think we kind of scanned over grade, probably the junior, intermediate, high school grades for assessment. So I will go back to that and say it is important in certain circumstances, especially with like whatever curriculum, for example, that you're using for math or science, they often include tests in that. So you could always do that with your child. Or I always like to ask children verbally questions, like just even have a discussion with them about what they know, what they would like to learn more of. Self-assessment is awesome to ask kids how they think they did. And honestly, most of the time they are very, very honest in what they learned, what they know, what they would like to learn more of. And that is one of the best things with learning at home is that you have the freedom to go deeper into that. So I have students now that I tutor that are often interested in like topics wildly beyond their age. So we have to really tread water lightly when we're learning about historical events that could be, violent or, World War
Controversial.
II. Yeah, it's just not the nicest topics that you would like kids to read about. But it's interesting when you give them the freedom to learn about different things and you're able to facilitate and guide that. And then in terms of asking where they'd like to go, they always have an answer. So it's not like I feel sometimes like adults have this need to take over and do it for the kids and make sure they're tested and tickety boo, everything has to be lined up. When really, in terms of staying in flow of kids learning, they need to have that direction themselves. So in terms of high school for assessment, I do understand that most parents are really cognizant and aware that they do need grades for certain things. And I'm not a high school teacher, but I do have experience with a homeschooler who did high school, and there are different courses offered. Ontario offers ILC courses that's work at your own pace, which is great for most students because high school students could sleep in and then, work for 6 hours if they wanted to, and then take a day off a week. However, they are able to give grades and the credits that way. There are lots of families and parents who are experts in how they homeschooled without going through grades for their children who were still entered into university and college as well. So I would encourage anyone who is wondering about that to reach out to families who have that experience.
Hmm. HSLDA does a lot of that too in terms of
Yeah.
credentialing and that kind of thing to prepare for next steps. So that might be very helpful. But also with the younger ones, like even though I'm an educator, I had to reduce my mental load because it's hard to do everything. And I started using a reading program. And so it kind of documents and assesses as it goes, the app itself. But I also started noticing things and I started just writing it down in a journal, like random things. I haven't even dated it. It was just like random points, but I started dating it because I started getting a few points. But just noticing that, because my oldest on the spectrum, he used to give me like one word answers. Now he's giving me complete sentences about, the comprehension of a book he read. Um, and just you see the development starting to happen and it starts to like you start to feel better about outcomes and then things do naturally evolve. Like it's October, Halloween, there's skeletons, that kind of thing. So all of a sudden they were really interested in the body and the skeletal system. And we just picked a lot of books and you just kind of go through them and see like they were able to identify parts of the body, parts of um, you know, different names of certain bones, not femur, but like skull and some of the basics. But yeah, you do naturally start to see things develop, and that's the benefit of homeschooling or small groups. A lot of these alternative education, they have small groups. They get to know the kids. There's strong relationship building, and you see their growth. And like Andrea said, they do, they're professionals, so they do document it, but it's also that, that more personal connection. There's a lot of observation that happens. And even from like a behavioral standpoint, I used to work with a lot of rascally kids and I had to show improvement. So what I would do is I would create a list of expectations, even like something as basic as this is your day. You wake up, you arrive, this is what you do, and just like break it down step by step. And we would just do a quick check mark if they accomplished it. And if not, there's like a really small little box that was why, was distracted with friends or whatever. You just put little notes. And then we started, like, as we checked things off with one kid, we just noticed that his mornings were really not great. And we realized this kid is not a morning person. And he started being really receptive. He's like, hey, you're right. I'm not a morning person. What can I do to better that situation? Because I'll always not be a morning person. I was like, well, let's talk about it. And obviously, they were higher functioning, even though they were neurospicy, but they were able to just do something about it. And we were able to kind of assess in that way. So when we spoke with the parents, we could say, okay, this is where they started. And now they can complete things to, 70% of the time. And we were able to like communicate that such improvements. And that was very just observational. So finding ways to document your observations with like checklists or something might be very helpful. If your kid has like a lot of outbursts or that kind of thing, you can just do like behavior checks and there's a lot of different assessment types, but keep it simple. Always keep it simple.
I have to interject and say I love how you brought that up because that was one of the things that I was going to share as well. Just even connecting with kids, you're able to get to know them on such a deeper level, and your connection actually spurs their assessment too, which is like it's so sad that it's like that, but really in terms of if a child's feeling comfortable, that's why teachers know, like you really don't want to assess a child in the first week of school because they're going to be anxious and they are absolutely not going to show all their beautiful gifts right away when they are first getting to know somebody. So I think in terms of when we say testing is subjective, it can also mean the child is not a morning person and you gave them a test at 9 o'clock and they would have done completely different if you gave them that test after lunch at 1 o'clock. Number two, they could have been sick They could have had a really late night. They could be, this is a huge one. I think that most people in education don't discuss that you can be going through a really rough time at home. Maybe their parent is an alcoholic. Maybe they're going through some addiction issues at home with a family member. Maybe their parents are fighting all the time. Maybe they're going through a divorce. Maybe they are newly like in this custody situation where they're going 1 week to dad's, 1 week to mom's, or going back and forth between houses. There are so many things that can affect a child's capability or what looks like their capability when they're doing tests or assessments. It's ridiculous to think that they could perform differently from Monday to Wednesday. I actually read a statistic once, and I'm sure a lot of people have heard this about how productive employees, quote, are each day of the week, and how it kind of like it's like a bell curve for the week. So Monday doesn't start off great. Wednesday's an awesome day. So if you are a factory worker, you're getting a lot done on Wednesdays, and then by Friday afternoon, like it kind of tapers off. And I really like that you also mentioned self accountability as well. I think that's a huge skill we are not seeing right now in adults in our society. So the fact that kids can be self accountable as well. I love that you had the little box. And you know what? Oftentimes kids will tell you why they are not doing that well. And if they really weren't paying attention to some particular subject, or maybe they weren't interested in it. It can come down to all different reasons.
It's so funny you say that. They're very self-aware. So when I was in the system before parent teacher interview, I don't know what these kids were thinking. They were always nervous. I was like, do you think I'm going to make stuff up to your parents? Absolutely not. I'm like, okay, we're going to write a journal and you are going to tell me what I am going to tell your parents based on feedback that I've given you throughout, like up to this point. And all of them nailed it. Or like, I talk too much to my friends, and I do want them to talk to their friends. I created a lot of social environments. Like we had a very flexible seating; they can move around the classroom. I did lesson plans that were very short, like 15 minutes. So, it was but it was one of those. It's funny to see how receptive they were. Work on my presentation skills, and they nailed it. And I just promised them I would not throw in any surprises, so don't worry.
Love it. All in all, kids are very honest. So when you are asking them to self-assess and they have that connection with you, they are going to be honest. They are truthful. And really, honestly, if you ever have a child that's not interested in learning, it's the adult's fault, not the child's. So I always like to remind people of that, is that children have the innate desire to want to learn. So if you are destroying that with testing, then you really need to rethink what is the point of testing? What is the point? What is the value? What's the value going to be 10 years from now, 5 years from now, 1 year from now? And really prioritizing what you learn. And that's, I think, honestly, going to shift a lot of things for kids in the alternative education realm in their confidence and their abilities and in their initiative as well. But I loved this conversation, Jeanette. I know we were going to go on to asking parents to provide some feedback. So maybe you could chat with that before we end today.
Definitely. So if you go to our website, www.limitlessedx.ca, or you can send us an email, info@limitless.ca. And also on the website, there's an option to send a text message, or you can also just DM us on Instagram. We also are on LinkedIn. And yeah, just shoot us any kind of stories or any subjects that you want to hear about. It can be from the lens of educators, from parents, anything related to the education sector. And yeah, we would love to hear and share lots of interesting things. And, things are going to be changing rapidly. I know people are going to, like Jillian said, that messy middle from Jillian Education. And that's where we're at as a society because of this major shift. So don't be shy. reach out to us and we'll be happy to discuss further. And of course, our main accounts, be sure to check out Andrea at Bloom at Home Learning and myself, Jeanette Easton at Refound Education. So we look forward to connecting with you all, and you are amazing. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, everyone.